Yasodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yasodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Banachari Yamuna Tira Banachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Vishnupad Paramahansa Parvajapacharya Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai ISKCON BBD Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Go Premanandi Hari Hari Bo Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd Canto, 12th chapter, text 28. Vacham duhitaram tanvim Vacham duhitaram tanvim Swayambor haratim manaha Swayambor haratim manaha Akamam chakame shattaha Akamam chakame shattaha Sakama itina shrutam Sakama itina shrutam Vacham duhitaram tanvim Swayambor haratim manaha Akamam chakame shattaha Sakama itina shrutam. Others, please. Vaishnavis. Vacham Vak Duhitaram unto the daughter Tanvim born of his body Swayambhu Brahma Haratim attracting Manaha his mind Akamam without being sexually inclined Chakame desired Shataha Ovidura Sakama being sexually inclined Iti thus Na we Shrutam have heard. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. So this is Maitreya speaking to Vidura. O Vidura, we have heard that Brahma had a daughter named Vak, who was born from his body, and who attracted his mind towards sex, although she was not sexually inclined towards him. Purport. Balavan Indriya Gramo Vidvam Sam Apikarshati. That's Srimad Bhagavatam, 9th Canto, Chapter 19, Text 17. It is said that the senses are so mad and strong that they can bewilder even the most sensible and learned man. Therefore, it is advised that one should not indulge in living alone, even with one's mother, sister, or daughter. Vidvam sam apikarshati means that even the most learned also become victims of the sensuous urge. Maitreya hesitated to state this anomaly on the part of Brahma, who was sexually inclined to his own daughter. But still he mentioned it because sometimes it so happens, and the living example is Brahma himself, although he is the primeval living being and the most learned within the whole universe. If Brahma could be a victim of the sexual urge, then what of others who are prone to so many mundane frailties? This extraordinary immorality on the part of Brahma was heard to have occurred in some particular kalpa, but it could not have happened in the kalpa in which Brahma heard directly from the Lord the 4 essential verses of Srimad Bhagavatam, because the Lord benedicted Brahma after giving him lessons on the Bhagavatam that he would never be bewildered in any kalpa whatsoever. This indicates that before the hearing of Srimad Bhagavatam he might have fallen a victim to such sensuality, but after hearing Srimad Bhagavatam directly from the Lord, there was no possibility of such failures. One should, however, take serious note of this incident. The human being is a social animal, and its unrestricted mixing with the fair sex leads to downfall. Such social freedom of man and woman, especially among the younger section, is certainly a great stumbling block on the path of spiritual progress. Material bondage is due only to sexual bondage, and therefore unrestricted association of man and woman is surely a great impediment. Maitreya cited this example on the part of Brahma just to bring to our notice this great danger. Okay, so I'm going to kind of work through this translation and purport. It's not a real long one, and I'm going to address, take it point by point and elaborate on the different points Prabhupada's making as I kind of go systematically through it. Okay, so the first point, the translation goes, O Vidura, we have heard that Brahma had a daughter named Vak who was born from his body and who attracted his mind towards sex, although she was not sexually inclined towards him. At least to me, that was the first significant point. That was the first point that I picked up on. She was not sexually inclined towards him. In other words, we're being told here that this was something not normal. And it's just one thing if Lord Brahma was attracted to his daughter. After all, he's the father of everyone in the material universe, and she was attracted to him. That would be one thing. But Maitreya Muni is particularly pointing out here that she was not sexually inclined towards him. So it was kind of like basically, in a polite way, what's being insinuated here is that, he was kind of like almost like rape. He was after her, and she wasn't interested. So that's kind of not so cool. Anyway, so that's what's being pointed out here in the translation by Maitreya. Then in the purport, Prabhupada says, he quotes from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 9th canto, a very famous verse, Balavan Indriya Gramo Vidvam Samapi Karshati. It is said that the senses are so mad and strong that they can bewilder even the most sensible and learned man. So I'm going to say something about the so mad and strong towards the end of the class. If I forget, you can remind me. But I'd like to say something about the most sensible and learned man. So yeah, this is very good evidence. Prabhupada, the translation is presenting very good evidence to support Prabhupada, the point Prabhupada's making here, where he's saying that these senses are so powerful that they can bewilder the most sensible and learned man. Because Lord Brahma is practically the most sensible and learned man in the universe. I mean, it could be argued, well, the 4 Kumaras are, even more sensible, maybe. Yeah, you could say. Narada Muni, even more so. But Lord Brahma is up there. He's a very sensible and learned person. And Prabhupada says twice again in this purport, he refers to him as the most learned. No, actually, once more. He says he's the primeval living being and the most learned within the whole universe. So Lord Brahma is kind of like way up there, and this happened to him. And then he goes on to say, therefore it is advised that one should not indulge in living alone, even with one's mother, sister, or daughter. Now somebody might, upon hearing that, think, isn't that taking it a little bit too far? I mean, come on, mother, sister, daughter. But vidvam samapi karshati means that and here it goes, even the most learned become victim of this sensuous urge. And once again, Lord Brahma is the example, because he was very, very learned. And he'd definitely be in this category of vidvam sam, which means one who's highly elevated in knowledge, and he got caught out here. So then it goes on to say, Maitreya hesitated to state this anomaly on the part of Brahma, who was sexually inclined to his own daughter. In other words, he felt a little maybe awkward or embarrassed even to mention the incident, because because Lord Brahma's exalted position. He's one of the 12 Mahajans. He's the Sampradaya Acharya. He's the chief engineer for the entire universe. And he's highly respected, so much so that somebody like Maitreya is kind of like feeling a little bit uncomfortable, even to mention the incident. But it goes on to say that, and it's referred to as an anomaly on the part of Brahma, who he was sexually inclined to his own. But he mentioned it because sometimes it so happens. And once again, it's repeated. The living example is Lord Brahma himself, the primeval living being and the most learned within the whole universe. And the last sentence in Prabhupada's purport relates to this. It clearly states that the reason Maitreya even brought this up was because it says this example is cited by Maitreya on the part of Brahma just to bring to our notice this great danger. Otherwise, he wouldn't even have mentioned it. If it wasn't for the fact that, I got to mention this. I'm not so comfortable to even bring it up, but because it's such an important lesson here, such an important point, I got to mention it. And so he's mentioning it. And now, next point, Prabhupada says, if Brahma could be a victim of sexual urge, then what of others who are prone to mundane frailties? Okay, so a couple points on that. One is, Prabhupada tells this story in one of his lectures, maybe a couple times, about there was this situation where these Vaishyas and people were traveling, and they had their possessions with them, and they had their animals with them. And there was a big storm came, and it's raining heavily. And so especially in Bengal, when there's a lot of rivers, Sometimes they refer to the rivers as highways. They're very, it's a lot of rivers, and when it rains, they get flooded. And when a river gets flooded, it doesn't flow the same way as when it's, normal weather. So it was raining, it's heavy, heavy rain, the rivers are flooded, and so in that situation, what they do is the human beings get on boats, and they let the animals swim across the river because, horses can swim. Particularly, he was talking about horses, and horses can swim, so they're allowed to kind of swim. So in this particular instance, though, it was so powerful. The current became so strong because of the heavy rains and the flooding waters that some of these horses, the strong, healthy horses, were being swept away by the current. And so then Prabhupada says, but there was one horse, one kind of thin, sickly horse, who he was down there on the shore with all the others when they were going in, and he could see that, they're getting swept away. But he was thinking, he backs off from the shore, and he goes up onto a little bluff, and he looks, let me see how is the water. And in other words, the purport of the story Prabhupada gave a little purport was that if all these big, strong, healthy horses are getting swept away by the current, you little skinny, sickly horse, what do you expect, You're so proud, you're going up on the bluff to look. Let us see how is the water, He's going to, there's no question of him being able to make it if the big, strong horses couldn't make it. So that's the point that's being made here. That it says here, if Brahma could be a victim of sexual urge, what to speak of others? In other words, what to speak of us? What to speak of us? We don't have a hope in his help. Is that a bad word? That's not a bad. We don't have a hope of not being falling prey to that if Lord Brahma got in trouble there. It says this extraordinarily. Oh, there's one more anecdote with that. How careful we have to be. Prabhupada also tells us in a lecture. He said once he was with his spiritual master, and I can't remember if it was Jagannath Puri or if it was, I think it was in Calcutta, Uttadanga, before they had the big temple there. So, there was like a darshan, and Prabhupada was there, and some god brothers were there, and there was one god brother, Prabhupada referred to him, Obiel Kapoor, who became initiated. He was as an initiated disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta. His name was Adi Keshava. So he was there with his wife, and they're sitting in a room, like a darshan. It was a darshan. So at one point, the wife of Adi Keshava said, Guru Maharaj, I'd like to speak to you. And I'd like to, yes, right? I'd like to speak to you. So he goes, yeah, okay, you could speak. And she goes, no, I need to speak to you privately. And he said, oh, no. He said, louder? Okay. Oh, like this, okay. Okay. How about this? Is this good? I think I'm practically shouting, but I'm feeling guilty of it. Okay, good. All right. So she goes, I'd like to speak to you, to Bhaktisiddhanta. And he goes, okay. So she goes, well, privately. And he goes, no, that's not possible. He says, these are all my men here, referring to his disciples and everything. These are all my men. You could speak freely in front of them. And so then Prabhupada, once again, he gave his purport to that incident. And his purport was that, he says, here Bhaktisiddhanta was old enough to be her grandfather. And it was his disciple's wife, so there's a certain relationship there, a lot of respect, going both ways, and a tremendous difference in age, but he wasn't willing, that he was that careful. He observed that carefully this point of you're not supposed to freely associate with the opposite sex, that he wasn't willing, even though he was he was a sannyasi, he was a lifelong celibate, he was the guru of the husband, and no, that was not on the table. He wasn't willing. It's once again another example, very powerful example of how careful we have to be in those dealings. Then it goes on to say here, Prabhupada goes on to make another point in this latter part of this first paragraph. He says, this extraordinary immorality on the part of Brahma was heard to have occurred in some particular kalpa, but it could not have happened in the kalpa in which Brahma heard directly from the Lord the 4 essential verses of Srimad Bhagavatam, because the Lord benedicted Brahma but I'll make the point and I'll continue on. So it happened, but despite the fact that this happened, and it's referred to here as extraordinary immorality on the part of Lord Brahma, there is a point at which Krishna forgave him. No, it wasn't an absolute disqualification. Perhaps a lot of time perhaps passed, because a kalpa is one round of the 4 millenniums, right? So how many are in one day of Brahma? How many kalpas in one day of Brahma? No initiated devotees, please. How many kalpas in one day of Brahma? Everybody, you should know this. 1,000. 1,000 cycles. Satya, Treta, Dwarpa, Kali, 1,000 times in one day of Lord Brahma. Okay, so that's how many years in a kalpa? 4,320,000. Right? Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, 4 billion. 4,320 million, yeah. And then, of course, his night is the same time. So the point is that in the entire lifetime of Lord Brahma, I worked it out. I don't get the figure here. There's 18 million. There's approximately 36 million kalpas. So if this incident happened more or less towards the beginning of Lord Brahma's life, because right now we're pretty much smack dab in the middle of Lord Brahma's life. He's about 50, I think. I've heard said 50, 51, something like that. So about 18, it could have been 18 million kalpas ago, approximately, that something like this happened. But it's referred to as extraordinary immorality. But anyway, it was a point that when Krishna decided, let bygones be bygones, and he was prepared to, give him the 4 essential verses of the Bhagavad. So he got forgiven at some point. So that's something to bear in mind, that people can mess up and they can make a comeback. Lord Brahma messed up, obviously, here, in the early part of his life, but he made a comeback, and that was accepted and acknowledged by Krishna. So that's just a point. Then another point that's made here is goes on to say that so it happened in some kalpa, but it couldn't have happened, it must have happened before Krishna gave him the 4 essential verses of the Srimad Bhagavatam, because when he did that, he gave Brahma a benediction that that he would never be bewildered in any kalpa whatsoever. See? So, now that's another point. Now, because I've heard Prabhupada say that Prabhupada was on a morning walk, and a devotee was asking about Prabhupada, it said that when we go back to the spiritual world, in the Bhagavad Gita, or maybe, you can never come back again, right? So the devotee was raising this point that, Prabhupada, once you go back to Godhead, you can't come back here. And Prabhupada interrupted him and said, no, you can come back. In other words, Prabhupada was, at least on that occasion, Prabhupada was making the point that you could always fall down again. You see? You could always fall down again. But here he's making the point that Lord Brahma got a benediction that he could never be bewildered in any kalpa whatsoever. So somebody might say that, it's a contradiction. Prabhupada's contradicting himself. And I just want to make the point that I think that's splitting hairs. When hearing, we're supposed to, hear from the spiritual master in a mood of, trying to understand. He's trying to, give us a message, instruction for our benefit. And just like in the last class I gave, I was talking about Vada, Vedanta, what is it? Vada, Jalpa, and Vitanda. I got it wrong, actually. Vada is when you're hearing, empathically, submissively. You're not hearing to win an argument. You're hearing because you want to understand. Jalpa is the one where you're just hearing and with the intention of just trying to find the fault so you can zero in on that and win an argument. And Vitanda is when you're just an argumentative kind of personality and you're just arguing for the heck of it, But so a disciple, though, somebody who's receiving knowledge from a spiritual master, should be hearing in that Vada mode. That you're hearing, if there's something that you're hearing, that it's kind of, the only thing you're questioning is your understanding. You're not trying to question, is this right or wrong? Is my spiritual master contradicting himself here? Did he make a mistake? The disciple doesn't think like that. He's thinking like, if he is not understanding something, he's thinking, so what is it, how am I not understanding this? I doubt my understanding. I don't doubt the spiritual master, that's the point. I'm not doubting the spiritual master's understanding of a subject. I'm doubting my understanding. That should be our mood. Okay, so that's just a point. Moving on. Okay, finally, Prabhupada now reverts back to the original points that he's making earlier in the purport. He says, one should, however, take serious note of this incident. The human being is a social animal, and his unrestricted mixing with the fair sex leads to downfall. Such social freedom of man and woman, especially among the younger section, is certainly a great stumbling block in the path of spiritual progress. So this expression stumbling block comes from the Bible, actually. It originates from the Bible. It's found in Leviticus, in that section called Leviticus, chapter 19, section 14. And it's talking about how you shouldn't criticize people who are handicapped, like people who are deaf or people who can't see. And so literally it meant don't put, like say somebody's blind. Here's the example, okay? Somebody's blind and they got their stick, their walking stick like that, but they don't have a service animal with them. They're just them, blind, and the stick. So, it's at that point in the Bible anyway, God's speaking, and he's enjoining or presenting the prohibition. Don't put stumbling blocks in front of them. It's like if somebody's blind and they're just trying to get along with their stick, you don't put a stumbling block, something in front of them that's going to maybe cause them to trip. You see? Actually, you should be doing the opposite. You should be watching and seeing, is there something that they may trip over, and take it away. So stumbling block is something that, can make you fall. That's where that expression comes from. So here Prabhupada's saying, such social freedom, man and woman, especially among the younger section, is certainly a stumbling block on the path of spiritual progress. Well, actually, it's really, I almost like to suggest it's more than a stumbling block. A stumbling block is something pretty serious, but even more serious than a stumbling block is a pitfall. And this is an out-and-out pitfall. And we really see that because the younger section, young people, let's say 21 and younger. I don't have a lot of experience with people younger than, say, 17, 18, but over the last 20 years, I've had a lot of experience with people from, say, 18 to, say, 25, because we distribute books at the colleges, and we're, constantly interacting with students. And my point is that they're very, in general, very respectful, we find them. They're very, they're kind of cooperative, respectful. They're kind of submissive to a certain extent. They're nice. They have nice qualities still. And so if they were taught the right things, what to speak of younger children? As you get younger, they're even more like that. They listen to what their parents, adults, teachers tell them. So my point is that people are not being taught properly. This is a real failure of contemporary human society all over the world, pretty much. I'm not going to analyze it and get into, because I don't understand it exactly how it's all, well, we could, but the point is that it's a real failure, because if young people were taught, if it's the responsibility, and there's a verse like that in the Bhagavatam, where Rishabdev says, don't become a parent, don't become a teacher, don't become a demigod, don't become like a leader if you can't deliver your dependents from material bondage. If young people were taught, if they were actually, sat down and taught that, hey, this is something you got to be careful about in your life, this is the proper understanding, you can do this, but don't do this, they would obey. You see, but they're not being taught. That's the point I would like to make. That the younger section is not being taught properly, and therefore, even more than a great stumbling block, it's a total pitfall. Young people get engaged in these types of activities at a very, very young age, and I don't know how much younger it can get, but it's and it ruins you for practically, you're not finished growing up yet. Your brain hasn't even fully developed yet when you're 13, 14, 15 years old. If you start messing around with these types of activities at that young age, you don't even develop to your full biological potential. What to speak of, being a proper moral and ethical human being. Your body doesn't even develop properly. So it's really, it's a shame. And then it goes on here to point out material bondage is due only to sexual bondage. So on that point, Prabhupada, there's actually one purport in the 4th canto of the Bhagavatam where Prabhupada says, the living entity is not forced to come into this material world. He makes his own choice being attracted by beautiful women. It's right there, black and white. I remember reading that and just feeling really shocked, like, wow, that's specific, The living entity is not forced to come into this material world. He makes his own choice being attracted by beautiful women. So purport being that it's a very powerful thing, very powerful thing, so much so that, it can actually, it's very, what's the word? It's very much part of, the living entities falling down into the material world, integral part. So, so lessons to be learned here, this is kind of, wrapping it up, that one is don't mess with social freedom. It's not like Lord Brahma, it's not like there's Lord Brahma, he produces his daughter, and then he gets, taken over by some zombies or something like that, and he's absolutely forced to do it. No, he kind of like played with fire. He had to. It's like Lord Brahma knew, he knows what's going on. He knows how the material energy works. He's kind of very instrumental in manifesting it. So he would have been able to understand that, hey, in the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Dhyayato vishayan pumsam, sangateshu bhajayate, sangat sanjayate kama, kama krodha bhajayate. By contemplating the opposites of the senses, one develops attachment. From such attachment, lust develops, and then from lust, anger. So there's a process. You see, it's not like all of a sudden Lord Brahma was, peacefully sitting there on his lotus. Does he sit on a lotus flower? No, yeah, peacefully sitting there on his lotus flower, and then all of a sudden, no, it was a process. Contemplation, from contemplation, one becomes attached. From attachment, lust. So he kind of went off course there, and that's what happens. So don't play with the expression. Don't play with fire, because he played with fire. He was doing something that he was at least to some degree conscious that, hey, I shouldn't be doing this, but anyway, and he got caught out. He got burnt. He got overwhelmed, and that's what happens. You play with fire. You think, yeah, just do this, do that, and then boom, you got a big problem on your hands, and that's what happened to Lord Brahma. So don't play with fire. That's one lesson. And then Krishna, I think Super Soul was kind of helping me to give me some further thoughts for this class that were relevant, because I did the Prabhupada's Artik this morning, and then after I did the Artik, I went. There was nobody. Sometimes somebody comes forward and grabs the tray, and they take it to clean it and everything, prepare for the next Artik. Nobody did this morning, so when that happens, I do it myself. That's taught by Bhrgupati Prabhu. That's what you got to do. So I went back there, and then Mother Irina came, and after about like 2 or 3 minutes, and she said, "Prabhu, I could do that." And so I said, "Oh, okay." But it reminded me, and I don't feel that I did anything wrong, but it reminded me of something I learned way back when I first joined in Henry Street, back almost 50 years ago, was that you don't take service from a woman. I remember as a very, very young devotee, like practically when in my first few days there, that was one of the things they would tell you right away. Don't accept service from a woman. You remember that? Did you get taught that right away? Okay. So in this case, as I said, I don't feel bad, because I felt like she was offering service not to me, but it was devotional service. She was, it's a little different. I think the real emphasis there is you don't take personal service. That's definitely a 100% total no-no. That was what we were taught. Don't take personal service from a woman. Why? Because you become attached. You immediately become attached. She's a person. Oh, it's so nice person. Serving me in this way and that way, and then boom, and then things go progress from there. So that's another point. And then, she took it over and she cleaned the tray, and so I'm leaving the temple room. I had to go back into my apartment and grab my book and my notes and everything. And as I leave the temple room, this young lady that just came, I'd never seen her before, but she came for the, greeting the deities and the artik. She left at the same time, and so I put on my shoes and I'm starting to walk towards the street. And she says, "Excuse me, can I ask you a question?" I said, "Yeah." She said, that tree that was in the middle there. I said, "What is it?" I said, "Oh, that's Tulsi." She said, "Oh, okay." And then she started kind of telling me her story a little bit. I said, she was asking a question about it. And I kind of told her a little something. And then, so I just said to her, because I could see she was, wanting some association, spiritual association. So I said, "So you're from?" Oh, she said, "No." She said, "I wear Tulsi beads." So I thought, oh, she must be from. She looked kind of maybe like she could be Indian. So I said, "Oh, so you're from an Indian background?" And she said, "No, I'm Mexican." I said, "Oh." I said, "How do you know about that?" She said, "Well, I live down in Venice. I was brought up down in Venice, Venice Beach area. So every year we'd see the Rath Yatra, and when the Rath Yatra cart was coming by, I'd always feel so enlivened. I'd always feel so joyful, and I would start chanting with them and dancing, and my family members and friends, they would be looking at me like, And she said, "Don't you feel like dancing?" And she was elaborating, and I said, "Well, maybe you were a devotee in your past life." And she said, "No, I can't understand. I can't understand my feelings. I can't understand why I'm feeling like that, I said, "Well, maybe you're a devotee from a past life, and you're just kind of, And she kind of started tearing up, and then the natural thing when you see somebody starts tearing up is the natural inclination is like, "Oh no, it's you touch them and it's okay, don't worry." No, that's my wife would always warn me about that. She says, "You don't be too nice with, even if women have problems or something like that, don't get involved, because if they start crying, then you're going to feel like you got to, do something to console them, and then the next thing you know, I remember when I was living in Auckland, New Zealand, there was one Indian member there, very nice man. He had a big, nice store called Indian Emporium, and he had a sign in the store: "Don't handle the merchandise." Don't handle the merchandise, because you're thinking, "Well, let me look at this thing. I might buy it," but you could break it. It could drop out of your hand, or you could just grab it the wrong way and knock something off the shelf. And obviously, that was his experience. So he had a sign there: "Don't handle the merchandise, because something can go wrong." That's the point. So that's another point. And then I was reminded of also. I think this is actually stated in the beginning of the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. Oh no, beginning of the Srimad Bhagavatam. There's that biography about Lord Chaitanya by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and I think it's mentioned there, but I definitely heard it from devotees, that Lord Chaitanya would not allow female disciples or just females in general to pay obeisances to him from close. They had to be like 9 yards away. Is that? Arch just shaking his head. Yeah. So that's Lord Chaitanya is showing that example, and among other examples, of course, there's other examples Lord Chaitanya showed, but they had to be like a certain distance away to pay obeisances. And another one, final one, is I'm glad this happened already a week or so ago. I have this when I'm on Sankirtan. I have this line sometimes I use. Like I do, Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, Science of Self-Realization. I have a higher taste because, people tend to be, sometimes they're not so interested in philosophy, but they're kind of receptive to getting a vegetarian cookbook. That's kind of like a way you can connect sometimes with people that's a bit easier than the philosophy. So sometimes I have this line, if I approach a couple, I'll, say something to them, and I'll say to the man, I say, is your wife a good cook? Does she cook as good as she looks? Like that? It's a joke, and I use it a lot. And I kind of just realized recently, it's not necessary. So I changed my line only about a week ago. But now I just say, do you know how to cook? That's enough. You know, if it's just a single Mataji I'm approaching, you know, I'll show them the book, and then if they're not so interested, I say, by the way, well, do you know how to cook? And I whip out the higher taste. Or if it's a couple, I can go to the guy, hey, does she know how to cook? And say, it has the same effect. It's not. Well, the point is, don't joke. We're also told, and you're not supposed to joke with women. And Prabhupada in a lecture made that point that Lord Chaitanya, he only made like there's only one instance where Lord Chaitanya joked with a woman, and that was his mother. And she was looking for something, and she couldn't find it. And Lord Chaitanya said to her, maybe your daughter-in-law has it. Maybe your daughter-in-law knows where it is, referring to his wife. And Prabhupada referred to that as that's the only time Lord Chaitanya made any joking words with the woman. So once again, another example of how strict Lord Chaitanya was. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. Does anybody have any questions about? Okay, first hand up. Go for it.
Thank you for such a nice class. What are the 4 important verses of the Srimad Bhagavatam it was saying?
Well, I don't have them memorized, but they're in the 2nd canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. What chapter is that? Chapter 9? Canto, 2nd canto, chapter? Yeah, it's chapter 9, 30. Okay, you got that? So it's 2nd canto, chapter 9, text 31 to 33.
Thank you.
Another question? Okay.
Thank you again for another beautiful lecture. I appreciate it a lot. Now I have a question in regards to what you're saying about the verse from Leviticus. Now, instead of criticizing a blind person, what can we do to help them see? And like obviously I'm not speaking of a physically blind person, but you know, maybe a spiritually blind person. Even though it says don't criticize a blind person, what can we do to help them see?
So you're saying not physically but spiritually blind?
Yeah.
Well, there's one lecture Prabhupada gave, and they titled it Books for the Blind. So these books are meant to help.
All right.
You know, and in the 1st canto of the Bhagavatam, there's a couple of different references that people will get light from this Purana, referring to the Srimad Bhagavatam. So yeah, you can, you know, that's what we're doing, is distributing Prabhupada's books. Give them one of Prabhupada's books. Prashadam, books, Harinam. This is what we're doing to, you know, give people some spiritual vision.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Question, Ananda Kirtan.
Hare Krishna. That example you gave of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, where one of his lady disciples wanted to have a private meeting with him. Acharya Narottam Prabhu gave an example of Jayapataka Swami doing the same thing while Acharya Narottam was in his presence. And then I asked him the question that nowadays, would it be appropriate if maybe...
You asked to Acharya Narottam or Jayapataka Maharaj?
I'm asking Acharya Narottam
okay.
this.
Yep.
Now I'm asking you this.
Okay.
Would it be appropriate if a wife and a husband went to their spiritual master who's a sannyasi? The wife had a personal question for him, and the sannyasi said, well, I can't meet with you in private because, you know, that's not proper. Would it be okay if the husband were to put in some earplugs and earmuffs and sit in the same room so that the woman can reveal her heart without feeling like embarrassed that someone else is hearing? Like, what if there's really something she wants to tell this sannyasi guru, but she feels embarrassed to, so therefore she can't because her husband
I would
there.
feel like, you know, no, I don't think that's
not appropriate.
If she can't say it in front of her husband, you know, I mean, she's there with a spiritual master and a husband. If she can't say it in front of her husband,
but her husband may be able to express things that he doesn't feel comfortable having his wife there. So him and his spiritual master may meet privately.
It's kind of like unfair, in other words. The man has access, private access to the guru, but
the husband can be there, but wear earplugs and earmuffs.
Well, I never heard a question like that before. I don't know. Maybe if the spiritual master felt it was appropriate and he gave permission, yeah, maybe. but it's a pretty unusual circumstance. Another question? Prema?
Hare Krishna. My question is, according to this class, and what I also read in Prabhupada books somewhere, you know, person like sannyasi, brahmachari, and even grihastha, supposed to be brahmachari, grihastha, should basically avoid speak with even another devotee woman alone. Could be, you know, outside, and it's good always to somebody else is close to him. Then, so this is my question: is it the best actually to avoid, because this means alone? You be alone, even if you're out on the street, but you know some other devotee is far away, and you have personal relationship. You know, some question answers. So this woman and this man. So brahmachari, sannyasi, and even grihastha should avoid it.
Okay, I think I got the drift of what you're saying, okay?
I understand.
All right, so first point is that as far as Sankirtan goes, Prabhupada was okay with men distributing books to women and women distributing books to men, because it was actually brought to his attention at one time, and he, I can't remember the exact, you know, situation, but he, you know, he said something to the effect that, no, it's okay. If it's, you know, if you're doing it for the purpose of distributing the book, you know, that's okay. You have to, you know, be careful, know what you're doing, okay? As far as like say a situation where like a woman's coming to the temple and preaching to her, you know, like for instance, a brahmachari preaching to somebody who's coming, better just introduce them to a Mataji and let them preach, you know, make friends with the Matajis like that. I mean, you know, you can be the person, you might be the person who kind of made friends with them, you know, because you met them on Sankirtan, and so you're their Vatma Pradakshina Guru. You've introduced them to Krishna consciousness. But then once they come to the temple, you know, introduce them to somebody of the same sex. If the same thing if a woman Sankirtan devotee gets a man, you know, meets a man, and he comes to the temple, he's coming to, you know, basically once, you know, when he comes, and if he's kind of coming into, you know, becoming involved in the community here, immediately he should be linked up with some other men, and they will continue his instruction.
So this is understandable, I understand it. But I mean, example, when, for example, one brahmachari, grihastha, or sannyasi is outside of the tapna room, and there is another Mataji came to you, I want to speak with you about service, about everything. It's still, and nobody's around, you can say. It still is like you are alone with that person.
Yeah.
So this should also, that be avoided according with...
Okay, once again, Prabhupada, as far as, because you used the word service there, and that Prabhupada did give an instruction that, you know, for service, yeah, I can't remember the exact words, but for service, yeah, you could, you know, have some sort of exchange. But as far as like preaching, the philosophy, that probably should be avoided. But like, you know, say you're a Sankirtan devotee, and some, you know, one of the another Mataji comes up who's a Sankirtan devotee, says, Prabhu, did you go to CSULA last week? Well, how recently have you been to CSULA? You know, yeah, of course, you answer the question. It's about service. It's very specific. It's about service. It's going to be brief, and that's nothing wrong with that. But if they say, can I ask you a philosophical question? And, you know, you're brahmachari, and this is somebody who's a brahmachari, somebody's living in the ashram, not married, then, you know, better, that's not, probably should be discouraged. That wouldn't be the correct thing. Okay, better that she goes to the temple president or some senior Mataji.
I understand.
Can answer that question. Yeah?
Thank you very much.
Question? There's a question, right? Okay, question, and then... Oh, okay, last question, and then we'll take the brief comment, right? Yeah. Yeah, we got time.
Okay, I'll make it short. Is it more so on the bodily, like, conception platform of life? If, how do I put this? If we're, like, opposed to the discrimination between sexes, because some may argue that it's more advanced that You know, we're all spirit souls, so there shouldn't be discrimination between the body. You know, we have different bodies as, like, do you know what I mean? Like, some may say it's more advanced.
Yeah, well, yeah, but we've been given guidelines by our acharyas, our spiritual master, acharyas, and even Lord Chaitanya. So it's good to have that understanding within, you know, your head like that, but you have to behave according to the guidelines. Like, and I've mentioned some guidelines, you know, throughout and during the class and in this question and answer period. Does that make sense? Is that responding to your question?
Yeah, like we have to behave according to the bodily position.
Yeah, yeah, you got to follow those guidelines. We can't, you can't do like Narada Muni did. You know, Narada Muni, super briefly, you know, Narada Muni had Hiranyakasipu's wife, Prahlad's mother, with him in his ashram, all by himself, because you know they were going to kill her because the demigods were going to kill her because, or they were taking her away. And Narada Muni said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, this is Hiranyakasipu's wife, and she's got her son. You know, she's got his Hiranyakasipu's son in her womb. So we're going to, you know, take her. And I don't think they were going to kill her. They were just going to." But they, you know, so he wasn't at all satisfied with how they were treating her. So he told them, no. Oh yeah, no, they wanted to wait till she gave birth, and they wanted to kill the child because it was Hiranyakasipu's son. So they figured like father, like son. So then Narada Muni, first of all, he corrected him. He said, no, in her womb is a Mahabhagavat. And they just accepted that because it's Narada Muni. So they released her to him, and she lived with him in her ashram, and she was preaching. He was preaching to her, and it's described that she couldn't remember anything. And but Prahlad Maharaj, even though he was in the womb, he got the benefit of all the instruction Narada Muni was giving to his mother. See, so Narada Muni could do that. Haridas Thakur, he could stick around for 3 nights when the prostitute came to try to seduce him, but us, we're not recommended to do that. You know. Comment.
Okay, fine.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So the question really is not whether it's man with woman. The question is, if I as a man am talking to a woman, what am I talking about? If I'm talking about this philosophy, I'm talking about bhakti, I'm talking about the guidance that Prabhupada gave us, is that what I'm focused upon? And if that's what I'm focused upon, there's nothing wrong with that. But if, while I'm talking about that, I'm looking at her beautiful eyes, or her lips, or her posture, or her figure, that is not all right, okay? So the question is, what are we doing when we're doing something right? Are we also doing something wrong? And if there's something wrong going on, then that should be eliminated. It should be omitted. It should be, that's what these classes are for, to guide us and direct us that the thing we should be thinking about is this wonderful philosophy. And again, I've been warned, even as a sannyasi, to not spend too much time with a female. Just as much as absolutely necessary, like a few minutes. Yeah, they actually give me a number of times. That's why you see me not giving classes, because I was punished. My punishment was that I could not give classes because I spent too much time with the woman explaining something to her, which took a little more time. But the GBC said, look, you're setting a bad example for the brahmacharis. So therefore, some punishment should be necessary. So that's why you don't see me giving classes, although I will be in about a month or so, because it was given a 6-month punishment. So I said, why only 6 months? Why don't you give me a year? Because I'm a pretty bad critter. They said, of course, you want a year? We'll give you a year. So I took a year to not have giving any classes. And that was the, but the main point is setting the example. And that everyone who's been here for some time should set the example, even if you're not doing anything. I said, well, look, I haven't had any experience in 45 years. It doesn't matter. The example is that people will say, well, Amala Bhakti, he's talking to this woman for 6 or 10 minutes, and why can't I do that? So therefore, I accepted that, and I let it go, and that's why you hardly see me speaking very much time with females. But in general, there's not, if you're talking about, for example, in these commentaries about spiritual life, there's nothing wrong with the woman asking a man a question or a man giving some guidance. But the main point is that our focus should be on the subject matter and not an underhanded subject matter, as I just mentioned, her beautiful voice and her beautiful eyes and her ears and this and her hair. That should not be there. And we should make it every effort to avoid it, to ignore it, to disregard it, and to consciously stop it, okay? And it can be, because we have willpower. And if you don't use your willpower, then what will happen is your willpower will be attacked, overcome, and then we will become victims of this situation. And the whole idea is we should not be victims, rather we should make the situation such that we gain guidance, we gain development, we gain improvement, and not deterioration and degradation. That's the whole point.
Thank you. Great comment. Anybody else like to say anything? Okay, then thank you very much. Kanjai Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.